Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Tonight, I'm taking you to Alaska's national parks, places so remote that when something goes wrong, you're completely alone. We have 9 true stories from park rangers and workers, and I need to warn you, what they experienced out there will shake you to your core. One ranger started hearing voices coming up through the water pipes, voices of people who went missing years ago. Another discovered that the families visiting the park weren't always the same families that came back out. And what a security guard caught on her hidden cameras. Let's just say some things in those forests are watching us back. These aren't made-up campfire stories. These are real accounts from real people whose jobs brought them face-to-face with something unexplainable in America's last frontier. If you're new here, hit subscribe right now because Mr. Midnight brings you the most disturbing true stories every single day. Turn on that bell so you don't miss a single one. Now, kill your lights. Because once you hear what's really happening in Alaska's parks, you'll understand why some rangers quit after just one season. Our first story starts in a place that looks innocent enough, an old abandoned schoolhouse. But what the new ranger found inside made her realize that some students never leave, even 60 years after the final bell. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I've been working in education for 11 years now. I spent 6 years as a 3rd grade teacher in underfunded public schools before I completely burned out. The constant budget cuts, oversized classes, and endless paperwork made me forget why I loved teaching in the first place. When I saw the posting for a ranger position at Katmai National Park in Alaska, I thought working with nature instead of dealing with difficult parents and administrative headaches would be exactly what I needed. I was 29 and ready for a complete change. But what I discovered in that remote corner of the Alaskan wilderness made me realize that some students never really leave school, even 60 years after their last bell rings. The ranger position seemed perfect on paper. I'd be maintaining historical sites within the park, doing educational programs for visitors, and spending most of my time outdoors in one of the most beautiful places on Earth. My sector included the ruins of Kalanak Village, a small Alaska Native community that was abandoned in 1963 when the government forced residents to relocate for what they called economic development. Most of the village was gone now, just concrete foundations and scattered debris reclaimed by the forest. But one building had survived completely intact, the old schoolhouse. The schoolhouse was my main responsibility. The Park Service wanted it preserved as a historical site, so I had to maintain the building, conduct tours for the few visitors who made it out that far, and keep detailed records of its condition. It was a small, white wooden building with 4 tall windows on each side and a bell tower that still had its original brass bell. Inside, everything looked exactly like it had been frozen in time. 20 wooden desks arranged in neat rows, a large black chalkboard at the front, even children's artwork still hanging on the walls. The kids had drawn pictures of their families, their dogs, and scenes from village life, simple crayon drawings that showed sleds, fish, and stick figure families standing outside tiny houses. I have to admit, I loved working there at first. The building reminded me of why I'd become a teacher in the first place. Small class size, personal attention, education that actually connected to real community life instead of standardized test prep. Sometimes I'd sit at the teacher's desk and imagine what it must have been like to teach there, helping children learn while snow piled up outside and the smell of wood smoke drifted in from the village homes. The first strange thing happened about 3 weeks into the job. During my routine cleaning, I was dusting the student desks when I found fresh crayon drawings scattered across several of them. Simple pictures done in a child's handwriting, showing stick figures and houses just like the old artwork on the walls. But these drawings hadn't been there the day before. I was sure of it because I cleaned every single desk every Tuesday and Friday. I figured tourists must be sneaking in despite the remote location. The schoolhouse was accessible by hiking trail, and maybe some family with kids had decided to let their children play school while the parents took photos. But when I looked closer at the drawings, they showed scenes that modern children wouldn't know about. Wood-burning stoves, dog sleds, people wearing traditional Alaska Native clothing, and using tools from the 1960 seconds. The level of detail was too accurate for random tourist vandalism. More drawings appeared over the next few days. always in different colored crayons, always depicting life from 60 years ago. Children playing games I recognized from my research into traditional Alaska Native culture. Families gathered around fires, people fishing with traditional nets and tools. The artwork showed the kind of intimate knowledge of village life that only someone who'd actually lived there would have. I decided to set up a security camera to catch whoever was doing this. I bought a trail cam from the visitor center gift shop and positioned it to watch the entire classroom. The first night, nothing happened. But the second night, the recording showed something that made my hands shake as I watched the playback on my laptop. The drawings were creating themselves. Crayons lifted off the desk surfaces and moved across blank paper without anyone holding them. Small, careful strokes building pictures of village scenes while the empty classroom sat in perfect silence. The crayons moved with the hesitant, careful motion of a young child concentrating hard on staying inside the lines. My teacher training kicked in automatically. After 6 years of classroom management, I could recognize children's work patterns anywhere. These drawings showed the motor skills, artistic development stages, and subject matter choices I'd seen from 8 and 9-year-olds thousands of times. But the children of Kalanak village would be in their 70s now, if they were still alive. I started noticing other signs of recent child activity around the classroom. Small handprints appeared on dusty windowsills overnight. Toys that had been scattered across one corner of the room were arranged in neat play patterns the next morning. Chairs were moved to different positions, adjusted to exactly the right height for elementary school children to sit comfortably at the desks. The handprints were what really convinced me something impossible was happening. They were the perfect size and finger spacing for kids between 6 and 10 years old. And they appeared in rooms I had thoroughly cleaned and secured the previous day. The building had only one entrance, which I locked every evening with a key only I possessed. Using my classroom management experience, I decided to try communicating with whatever was causing the activity. I left fresh paper and a full box of crayons on each desk, along with a note written in large, simple letters. "Hello, my name is Miss Sarah. Who are you? Are you okay?" The next morning, I found a response drawn in careful block letters across 3 pieces of paper. "We are still in school. Teacher never came back. When is recess? We have been very good." My heart absolutely broke reading those words. I sat down in one of the tiny chairs and just cried for 10 minutes. These children, whoever they were, had been waiting 60 years for their teacher to return. They were still sitting in their desks, still trying to be good students, still hoping someone would care about their education. I researched everything I could find about the village evacuation. The truth was even more horrible than I'd imagined. According to government records and newspaper accounts, the children had been attending school on the day the evacuation order came. Their teacher, Mary Kalanak, had left the building to get more information from village leaders and never returned. The children waited in the schoolhouse for 3 days while the adults dealt with the chaos of forced relocation. When search teams finally found the children, several had died from exposure and terror. They'd tried to take care of each other, the older ones helping the younger ones, sharing their lunch and staying huddled together for warmth. The survivors were traumatized beyond repair. Most never fully recovered from the abandonment. I realized that somehow, some way, the spirits of those children had never left the school. They were still waiting for their teacher, still trying to continue their education, still hoping someone would come back and care about their learning. So I decided to give them what they'd been waiting for. Using my teaching experience, I began conducting actual lessons for them. I wrote math problems on the chalkboard before I left each evening and found them solved the next morning in careful child handwriting. Addition, subtraction, simple word problems about village life. Every answer was correct. The ghostly students were incredibly eager to learn. I left reading assignments and found thoughtful responses written on notebook paper, essays about their families, their pets, their favorite games, spelling tests that came back with perfect scores. These children had been waiting 60 years to continue their education, and they attacked every lesson with the enthusiasm only kids can have. But I also noticed that their work reflected deep trauma, stories about being scared and alone, drawings of adults leaving and never coming back, math problems about subtraction and loss. If 8 children wait for teacher and teacher never comes back, how many children are still waiting? I started creating therapeutic lesson plans, using art therapy and creative writing exercises I remembered from my education training. Slowly, carefully, I began helping them process their abandonment trauma through schoolwork. My education degree finally felt meaningful again. The children began leaving me personal notes alongside their assignments. Questions about the modern world, requests for specific lessons, and heartbreaking messages about missing their families. "Miss Sarah, are our mommies coming back? Can you teach us about where everyone went? We promise to be very good if you stay." I learned their names from old school attendance records I found in the teacher's desk. Johnny, Mary, Peter, Anna, Tommy, Susan, David, and Michael. 8 children between ages 6 and 10. I began addressing them individually in my lessons, writing their names on assignments and praising their work specifically. As weeks passed, the children started manifesting more clearly during my visits. Transparent figures sitting at their desks, raising their small hands to answer questions, giggling softly at my jokes just like living students. I could see them most clearly when I was fully engaged in teaching mode, explaining concepts and asking questions just like I had with my real classes. They responded to familiar classroom routines. They knew to raise their hands before speaking. They lined up properly for activities. They showed the same mix of curiosity, restlessness, and eagerness to please that I remembered from hundreds of living students. But each week, I noticed the manifestations becoming weaker. Their schoolwork became less detailed, their presence more faint. They were finally moving on, but they needed proper closure first. They needed to graduate. I spent weeks planning a real graduation ceremony for them. I created individual diplomas with their names, decorated the classroom with paper chains and drawings, and prepared a proper celebration. These children deserved recognition for their patience, their dedication to learning, and their 60 years of perfect attendance. The night before graduation, all 8 children appeared clearly for the first time. They looked exactly like the photographs in the old school records. Older, sweet faces wearing simple 1,960 seconds clothing, braided hair, and missing teeth, and bright, curious eyes. For the first time since I'd started working there, they looked truly at peace. Mary, the oldest at 10, walked to the chalkboard and wrote in careful cursive, "Thank you for finishing school with us, Miss Sarah. We can go home now. We learned everything good." The next morning, I held their graduation ceremony. I called each child's name and presented their diploma, watching as transparent figures walked across the front of the classroom to receive recognition they'd earned decades ago. They were smiling, finally free to leave their desks and join their families. After graduation day, the supernatural activity stopped completely. No more drawings appeared overnight. No more handprints on dusty surfaces. No more homework assignments completed by invisible students. The children had finally been released from their endless school day. I submitted a detailed report to the Park Service about the historical significance of the site and recommended converting the schoolhouse into a proper memorial for the lost children of Kalanak Village. The administration approved the project, and I helped design educational displays about the village's history and the children who'd waited so long for someone to care. During the memorial dedication ceremony, several elderly people attended, the surviving students who'd been evacuated from Kalanak as children. They thanked me for helping their classmates find peace. One woman, now 78, told me something that confirmed everything I'd experienced. "I dreamed about my dead classmates every single night for 60 years, she said, tears in her eyes. "They stopped visiting my dreams last month. I think they're finally happy." I stayed on as the memorial's educational coordinator, developing programs that taught visitors about Alaska, Native history, and the devastating impact of forced relocations on indigenous communities. The schoolhouse became a place of healing for other communities that had experienced similar losses. I never experienced supernatural activity again, but I felt the children's presence during every educational program I conducted. They had wanted their school to keep helping people learn and grow, and that's exactly what happened. 5 years later, I'm still working at the memorial, training other educators to use historical sites for therapeutic learning experiences. Sometimes I find small gifts left on the old desks, wildflowers, interesting rocks, perfect autumn leaves. I think the children visit occasionally to show me what they've learned in their new existence. The most important lesson those 8 children taught me was that education is about more than curriculum. It's about caring for students as whole people, meeting them where they are, and never giving up on them. Even when those students have been waiting 60 years for someone to notice they never got to finish school. My ranger colleagues think I'm crazy for talking to ghosts, but any experienced teacher knows that connecting with difficult students requires unconventional methods and unlimited patience. The children of Kalanak village taught me that some trauma can only be healed through completion, and Manna finishing what was interrupted, providing the care that was missing, saying the goodbyes that never happened. I'm sharing this story because those 8 children deserved better than being forgotten. They were good students who died waiting for help that came too late. But they also taught me that it's never too late to care, never too late to teach, and never too late to help someone finally graduate and go home. Sarah Martinez, former 3rd grade teacher, current memorial educator. Sometimes the best lessons come from students you'll never meet in person, but who trust you enough to complete their education across the boundary between life and death. My name is Michael Chen, and I worked in emergency room trauma for 10 years before I became a park ranger. I've seen every kind of injury humans can survive. Gunshot wounds, car crashes, people who fell off buildings. Blood and broken bones don't scare me anymore. But nothing I learned in those hospital hallways prepared me for what I found in the medical cabin at Denali National Park. I was 35 when I left the hospital. Too many night shifts watching people die from things that could have been prevented. Too many families crying in waiting rooms. I thought wilderness medicine would be different, helping hikers with twisted ankles and dehydration. Real medicine without insurance paperwork and hospital politics. My assignment was the remote medical station at Wonder Lake. It's a fully equipped clinic that serves climbers trying to reach the top of Mount McKinley. I'd handle everything from altitude sickness to bad frostbite. The pay was good, and I'd finally be helping people who actually needed help instead of treating the same drug addicts every week. The clinic impressed me right away. Surgical equipment, blood supplies, emergency medications, etc., better stocked than some hospitals I'd worked in. Everything flown in at huge cost because when someone gets hurt on that mountain, there's nowhere else to go. The nearest real hospital is hours away by helicopter, and that's only if the weather's good. I loved the work at first. Real medicine helping people who were really in trouble. No insurance claims to file, no administrators telling me to hurry up, just skilled medical care in a place where it actually mattered. For the first time in years, I felt like I was making a difference. The first weird case came in October. A climber stumbled into my clinic with severe frostbite on both hands. He should have been dead. The tissue damage showed he'd been exposed for days. But someone had treated him. Professional medical work that couldn't have happened on the mountain. I'm talking about tissue grafts, nerve repairs, circulation restoration. Work that needs sterile conditions and specialized equipment. Stuff you can't do with a first aid kit in a tent. This guy's hands had been rebuilt by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. When I asked him about it, he got this distant look, said some friendly climbers had found him and helped him out. But he couldn't tell me where it happened or who they were. His memory of the whole thing was foggy, like he'd been drugged or something. Over the next month, I treated 6 more cases just like it. Patients who'd received expert medical care in wilderness conditions that shouldn't support that kind of work. Impossible surgeries done with tools and techniques I'd never seen before. They all had the same story, do it. Helpful strangers who'd patched them up and sent them on their way. But their descriptions of where this happened made no sense. They'd talk about medical facilities in places where there aren't any buildings, operating rooms on mountain peaks where there's barely enough oxygen to breathe. I started taking pictures of the surgical work I was seeing. The techniques were beyond anything they taught in medical school. Too precise, too efficient. Like whoever was doing this had been practicing surgery for 100 years. The scars healed wrong too. Too fast and too clean. The breakthrough came when I was hiking behind the maintenance cabins and found surgical waste. Bloody gauze, used sutures, discarded tissue samples. Fresh stuff, maybe a day old. Someone was doing major operations somewhere nearby, and they were being sloppy about cleanup. The trail led me to cabin 12. It was supposed to be empty, just a storage building for park maintenance equipment. No power, no plumbing, definitely no medical facilities. But that's where the surgical waste was coming from. I got the key from maintenance and checked it out during my lunch break. What I found inside made my blood run cold. Someone had converted the whole cabin into an operating room. Portable generators, surgical lights, anesthesia equipment, complete sets of instruments, everything you'd need to perform major surgery. But the setup was wrong. The operating table was too narrow for normal patients. The instrument trays were positioned for surgeons with longer arms than any human I'd ever met, and the lighting was all wrong, optimized for eyes that worked differently than ours. I decided to stake out the cabin that night, hid in the woods with my camera, hoping to catch whoever was using it. Around 3 a.m, 3 figures in surgical scrubs entered the cabin. They moved with perfect coordination, like they'd done this routine 1,000 times before. Even in the dark, I could tell something was off about them. Too tall, too thin, limbs that bent in ways that didn't look right. They set up their equipment with inhuman precision, every movement calculated and efficient. Then they brought in a patient, a climber I recognized from the rescue reports, a guy named Patterson who'd gone missing 3 days ago. He was conscious but sedated, answering their questions in a flat, emotionless voice like he was hypnotized. What they did to him next still gives me nightmares. They opened his chest with surgical precision and installed what looked like mechanical components directly into his heart and lungs. Not medical devices, I recognized. Something alien and wrong that pulsed with its own light. I knew surgical techniques from my trauma training, but this was something else entirely. They were upgrading human organs with artificial enhancements designed to improve survival in extreme conditions. Making Patterson into something more than human, his vital signs improved dramatically during the procedure. Oxygen efficiency increased, core temperature stabilized, cardiac function enhanced beyond normal, with human ranges. These things were turning him into a person who could survive conditions that would kill anyone else. I realized they'd been doing this for months. Taking climbers, experimenting on them, testing medical technologies that let humans survive impossible conditions. The patients became unknowing test subjects for some kind of research project. The surgery took 4 hours and was performed with flawless technique. When they finished, they sent Patterson back to his climbing team with devices implanted in his body that would help him reach the summit. But I knew from my medical training that foreign objects in the human body cause rejection reactions. These enhancements would kill him within months. I tried to intervene when they brought in their next patient, but they were ready for interference. One of them injected me with something that left me paralyzed but conscious. I could see and hear everything, but I couldn't move or speak. They examined me with the same clinical detachment they showed their patients, discussing my medical training value and potential for conversion to research assistant. Their voices were too precise, like they'd learned English from textbooks instead of growing up with it. The lead surgeon explained their research in perfect but unnatural English. They were developing life support technology for humans who would colonize hostile environments. The climbers were testing prototypes for equipment that would let people survive on worlds where humans couldn't normally live. Your species shows promise for extreme environment habitation, but requires significant physiological enhancement, the surgeon told me. Our research benefits both species through improved survival capabilities. They offered me a choice: join their research team and help improve their surgical techniques, or become a test subject and experience the enhancements firsthand. Either way, I wasn't leaving this mountain as a normal human being. I pretended to accept the research position while secretly planning to sabotage their operation. My medical knowledge would help me understand their technology well enough to destroy it. I just had to stay alive long enough to figure out how. Over the next week, I worked as their assistant, learning their surgical procedures and identifying weaknesses in their setup. They trusted my medical expertise to improve their techniques, not realizing I was looking for ways to shut them down. The technology was incredibly advanced but relied on Earth-based power sources and medical supplies. I could disable their operation by contaminating their drug supplies or sabotaging their generators. The hard part was doing it without them noticing. I discovered they'd been operating for years, gradually improving their enhancement technology by experimenting on missing climbers. Dozens of people had been used as test subjects. All the missing persons reports that never got solved. They weren't lost in the wilderness. They were taken. the enhanced climbers never survived long enough to report their experiences. The implants would fail after a few months, causing deaths that looked like climbing accidents. Heart attacks at altitude, equipment failures, falls that didn't make sense. All cover stories for medical experiments gone wrong. I used my access to their records to document everything. Names, dates, procedures, locations, evidence of illegal human experimentation that could expose their operation to authorities. But when I tried to transmit the data, I discovered they'd been monitoring all communications from the medical station. My betrayal was expected and planned for. The surgeons decided to use me for their most ambitious experiment, a complete physiological conversion that would transform me into a hybrid, being capable of surviving in any environment. The night before my scheduled surgery, I sabotaged their anesthesia supplies and surgical equipment, contaminated everything with cleaning chemicals that would make the procedures impossible. If they were going to cut me open, at least I'd take their operation down with me. When they discovered my sabotage, I activated the emergency beacon that would bring rescue helicopters to investigate. But they had a contingency plan for discovery. They began emergency evacuation of their equipment while performing one final surgery on me. Not enhancement, implantation of a tracking device that would let them monitor my location indefinitely. They cut into my shoulder and installed something the size of a grain of rice that burned like acid when it went in. The rescue team found me unconscious in cabin 12 with surgical incisions that I claimed were from a climbing accident. The alien medical equipment had been completely removed, leaving no evidence of what had really happened. Just another injured climber with a story that didn't quite make sense. My story about alien surgeons was dismissed as altitude-induced hallucination, and I was transferred to desk duty for psychological evaluation. But the tracking implant proved my experience was real. I could feel it moving under my skin, sending signals to whoever was monitoring me. I had the device surgically removed by a trusted colleague in Anchorage, but not before documenting its advanced technology. The implant was beyond anything human science could produce. Materials that didn't show up on X-rays, circuitry that worked without any visible power source. I left the Park Service and now work as a trauma surgeon in Anchorage, but I monitor missing climber reports for signs that the alien research has resumed at new locations. They're still out there, still experimenting, still turning people into test subjects. Several enhanced climbers have appeared in my emergency room over the past year. Patients with impossible survival stories and surgical scars that match the procedures I witnessed. They don't remember their enhancement surgery, but their medical scans show artificial components integrated into their organ systems. I've tried warning other medical professionals, but alien surgical technology is too advanced for most doctors to believe. I sound like a conspiracy theorist when I describe impossible procedures and enhancement implants. The evidence gets dismissed as equipment malfunction or misdiagnosis, but my trauma training helps me recognize the enhanced patients when they arrive. I provide specialized care for their artificial organs while secretly documenting the alien medical technology. Someone has to be prepared for the medical crisis that's coming when those implants start failing. I'm building a database of enhanced patients and their medical needs, hoping to develop treatments for when their enhancements inevitably break down. Because they will break down, I've seen what happens when alien technology fails inside human bodies. My name is Michael Chen, trauma surgeon, former park ranger, current guardian of alien medical secrets. The surgeons in cabin 12 are still operating somewhere in Alaska, still enhancing humans for purposes we don't understand. And when their experiments go wrong, those patients will need doctors who know the truth. If you're planning to climb Mount McKinley, be careful who offers to help you when you're injured and alone. Not everyone wearing surgical scrubs has your best interests at heart. Some of them aren't even human. My name is Carlos Rivera, and I've been doing logistics work for 12 years now. Started driving delivery trucks in Phoenix when I was 21, worked my way up to route supervisor, handled everything from medical supplies to construction equipment. I thought I knew what remote delivery meant until I took a job with the National Park Service in Alaska. That was 3 years ago, and what happened at Research Station 7 still keeps me awake at night. Sometimes the most dangerous delivery isn't what you're carrying, it's who you're delivering it to. I moved to Alaska right after my divorce was finalized. My ex-wife got the house, I got the debt, and I needed a fresh start somewhere far from Phoenix. The Park Service was hiring logistics coordinators for their remote research program, and my commercial driving license plus wilderness survival training made me a perfect fit. The pay was good, the benefits were solid, and I figured working outdoors would be healthier than sitting in traffic all day. My job was supplying 12 research stations scattered across Wrangell Street, Elias National Park. Each station studied different things: glacier movement, wildlife populations, climate data, soil samples. Most were staffed by teams of 3 or 4 scientists, accessible by helicopter or ATV, depending on the season. The work was challenging but straightforward. Plan efficient routes, coordinate with weather services, make sure researchers got their supplies on time. Real problem-solving skills applied to meaningful work. Research Station 7 was my most difficult stop. 80 miles from the nearest road, perched on a ridge overlooking the Copper River Valley. During winter, it was helicopter-only access. Summer meant a brutal 12-hour ATV ride through terrain that would break your spine if you weren't careful. The station monitored climate data, recording temperature, precipitation, and atmospheric readings every 6 hours around the clock. Dr. Sarah Kim ran Station 7 by herself. She'd been there 3 years when I started, longer than any solo researcher in Park Service history. The woman was brilliant, had published papers on Arctic climate systems that got quoted by the United Nations. But 3 years alone in the wilderness does things to people. I could see it in her eyes during my first delivery. Too bright, too eager for conversation, the way she stood too close when we talked. Dr. Kim's supply requests were normal at first. Food, batteries, research equipment, winter clothing. Standard stuff for a solo researcher in one of the most isolated places in North America. But after about 6 months, her orders started getting weird. Children's toys, board games, stuffed animals, coloring books. When I asked about them, she said she was expecting visitors and wanted to be prepared for family research assistants joining her project. That made no sense. Station 7 was classified as solo research. Park Service records showed no approved visitors, no additional personnel, no family members with clearance to access the site. But Dr. Kim kept ordering supplies for multiple people. Different-sized clothing, extra bedding, birthday decorations, Christmas presents, items that cost the Park Service thousands of dollars every month. I started paying attention during deliveries. The station had been modified, extra sleeping areas built into what used to be storage space, multiple plates and cups in the sink, beds made for different-sized people, personal items scattered around that definitely didn't belong to Dr. Kim. Men's clothing, children's books, family photos of people I'd never seen. But whenever I asked about other residents, Dr. Kim insisted she was alone. The first time I caught her talking to invisible people was during a November delivery. I arrived early because of incoming weather, found her setting the table for dinner. 6 place settings, complete with napkins and candles. She was having a conversation with the empty chairs, laughing at jokes I couldn't hear, passing dishes to people who weren't there. When she noticed me watching, she introduced me to her family, her husband Mark, children Jenny and Alex, her mother Helen, and research assistant David. I played along at first, thinking she was having some kind of breakdown and needed professional help. But Dr. Kim wasn't just pretending. She genuinely believed these people were real. She knew what each invisible person was doing, had detailed conversations with them, maintained consistent personalities for each hallucination. The woman was living in a complete alternate reality. I reported my concerns to park administration. Told them Dr. Kim was experiencing psychological problems, probably from isolation, and needed immediate evacuation. But her research data was too valuable. Climate readings from Station 7 fed into national weather models and international climate studies. Administration told me to focus on delivery logistics and not interfere with research activities. As long as she kept transmitting data, they didn't care about her mental state. The supply costs kept climbing. Dr. Kim ordered expensive medical equipment for her sick husband, wheelchair modifications for her disabled mother, birthday cakes, anniversary gifts, graduation presents for people who existed only in her mind. Every month, the requisition forms got longer and more elaborate. The Park Service approved everything because they assumed she knew what she needed. Things escalated during a February delivery. Dr. Kim reported a medical emergency. Her husband had collapsed and needed immediate helicopter evacuation. She was sobbing, begging me to call for emergency transport. I had to explain to dispatch that there was no medical emergency, just a researcher having a psychological crisis who thought her hallucination needed medical attention. The rescue team was furious about the false alarm, but Dr. Kim blamed me for abandoning her family. She accused me of being jealous of their happiness, of deliberately sabotaging their medical care. Her supply orders became demands: hospital equipment for her dying husband, funeral supplies when he passed away, grief counseling materials for her, traumatized children. She was ordering items for increasingly elaborate scenarios involving people who had never existed. The breaking point came during a March delivery. I arrived to find Dr. Kim holding a funeral service. She'd arranged chairs in rows, set up flowers and candles, even written a eulogy for her research assistant David, who had supposedly died in an equipment accident. She was genuinely grieving for someone who had never lived. The woman was completely disconnected from reality. I stayed overnight to monitor her condition, hidden in my ATV, while she went through her nightly routine. Through the station windows, I watched her prepare dinner for 6 people, have animated conversations with empty chairs, tuck invisible children into bed, kiss her imaginary husband goodnight. She was living a complete fantasy life, and every delivery I made was enabling her delusions. My equipment started acting up around Dr. Kim. My GPS would show impossible readings, claiming the station was in locations that didn't exist. Radio communications got scrambled, picking up conversations between voices I couldn't identify, talking about research projects that weren't in any Park Service database. My ATV's engine would rev on its own, as if something was trying to start it remotely. During my April delivery, I brought a satellite phone that could connect Dr. Kim with real colleagues and family members. Hearing actual voices seemed to help her distinguish between reality and hallucinations. She started admitting that sometimes she couldn't see her family members, that they seemed to disappear when she tried to focus on them directly. The atmospheric readings from Station 7 were becoming impossible. Temperature sensors showed readings that defied physics, rooms measuring different temperatures simultaneously, heat signatures for people who weren't there, pressure changes that suggested multiple occupants in an empty building. My delivery logs became documentation of a reality that didn't make sense. But the scariest part was how detailed Dr. Kim's delusions were. She knew exactly what each imaginary person had eaten for breakfast, could describe their daily schedules, remembered conversations from months earlier with perfect consistency. Her mind had created an entire alternate universe to cope with isolation, and it was becoming more real to her than actual reality. I started documenting everything: photos of the modified station, recordings of Dr. Kim's one-sided conversations, copies of her impossible supply requests. Evidence that isolation could create psychological realities so convincing that the person responsible experiencing them couldn't tell the difference between imagination and truth. The climax happened during my final delivery to Station 7. Dr. Kim's family had apparently planned a surprise party for my birthday, a date she couldn't possibly have known. She decorated the station with streamers and balloons, baked a cake, wrapped presents supposedly from each invisible family member. She was so happy to share this celebration with me, so proud of her family's thoughtfulness. But as I stood in that decorated room, surrounded by gifts from people who didn't exist, watching Dr. Kim sing happy birthday to an audience of empty chairs, I finally understood the true horror. Her isolation hadn't just created hallucinations. It had created a complete alternate reality so detailed and convincing that she couldn't distinguish it from truth. And every delivery I'd made had fed those delusions, making them stronger and more elaborate. I convinced Dr. Kim to accept evacuation for routine medical evaluation. She was diagnosed with severe isolation-induced psychosis and transferred to collaborative research projects where she'd never work alone again. Her imaginary family slowly faded as she received proper treatment and genuine human contact. Research Station 7 was permanently closed. The Park Service implemented new protocols requiring psychological evaluations for solo researchers and mandatory rotation schedules to prevent extended isolation. My delivery routes were restructured to include welfare checks as well as supply delivery. Dr. Kim recovered completely and now leads a climate research team at the University of Alaska. Her scientific work is still valuable, but she can never work in isolation again. Sometimes she sends me holiday cards, always signed by herself alone, a reminder that reality is something she had to relearn. I'm still doing logistics for the Park Service, but my job description now includes psychological first aid training. I watch for signs of isolation stress in remote researchers, document unusual behavior patterns, and maintain communication protocols designed to keep people connected to reality. Sometimes, the most important supply isn't equipment or food, it's human contact. The scariest thing about Dr. Kim's case wasn't the hallucinations themselves. It was how perfectly her mind had adapted to isolation by creating exactly what she needed to survive psychologically. Her imaginary family wasn't random. They were precisely the people she missed most, saying exactly what she needed to hear, providing the social connection her brain required to function. But those elaborate delusions came with a cost. Every interaction with her invisible family pulled her further from reality. Every supply delivery that enabled her fantasies made it harder for her to distinguish between imagination and truth. By the time I recognized the problem, she was living in a world where fantasy had become more convincing than facts. My name is Carlos Rivera, logistics specialist and guardian against isolation madness. I learned that the most remote delivery address in Alaska isn't a geographical location, it's the psychological distance between reality and the mind's desperate attempt to survive alone. And sometimes, the most dangerous cargo you can deliver is the supplies that feed someone's escape from truth. My hands won't stop shaking. They gave me these pills, but I can still hear them, in the walls, in the vents, in every electronic device they bring near me. The doctors think it's trauma, but they're wrong. The voices aren't in my head, they're everywhere else. I need to tell you what really happened at Harding Icefield Station before they make me forget again. My name is Jessica Park. I was an audio engineer for 12 years before Alaska destroyed everything I thought I knew about sound. I mixed concerts, fixed speaker systems, worked with equipment that could liquefy your organs if you cranked it wrong. I understood how every frequency, every wavelength, every vibration worked. That knowledge should have saved me. Instead, it made me the perfect target. I got laid off in March. 6 months of unemployment ate through my savings, so when the Park Service said they needed someone with radio experience for a remote station, I jumped at it. $40,000 a year to sit in the wilderness and monitor emergency frequencies. After dealing with rock stars and venue managers, isolation sounded like paradise. Harding Icefield Station sits 37 miles from the nearest human being, one-room cabin, emergency generators, and communication equipment that connects you to the outside world. Your job is simple: monitor radio traffic, coordinate rescues, keep people alive. The previous ranger quit mid-season. Stress, they said, couldn't handle the isolation. I should have asked why she screamed when they mentioned my name during the handover call. The station's equipment was impressive. Multiple frequency scanners, digital recording systems, satellite uplinks. But it was set up wrong. Antennas positioned poorly, signal processors running outdated firmware, interference filters that were actually creating more noise than they blocked. I spent my first week fixing everything, optimizing the arrays, upgrading the software. My supervisor was thrilled. Said, I'd made it the most technically advanced ranger post in Alaska. I was proud of the work. Every modification increased our range, clarified our signal, made the system more sensitive to incoming transmissions. I made it hungry. The first anomaly happened on a Tuesday night. I was monitoring the emergency frequencies when I heard a conversation that shouldn't have existed. Base to Ranger Chen, we have visual confirmation on the Eagle Glacier body recovery, scheduled for 0800 Thursday. I checked the duty roster. No operations planned for Eagle Glacier. No missing persons reports. Chen wasn't even on duty Thursday. But the voice used perfect radio protocol, correct call signs, Chen's actual badge number. Thursday morning, Ranger Chen found a frozen corpse at Eagle Glacier at exactly 8 a.m. A week later, I heard, Ranger Martinez reports family separation incident, Gruink Lake Trail, Friday 1000 547 hours. Father will deviate from marked path at waypoint 7. Mother, you will attempt cellular contact at 1603 hours. Friday came. The Martinez family got separated at Gruink Lake at 3:47 p.m. Father left the trail at waypoint 7. Mother called for help at 4:03 p.m., 16 minutes later than predicted, but close enough to make my blood freeze. I started recording everything. As an audio engineer, I knew these weren't signal bounces or atmospheric interference. The conversations had impossible clarity. Perfect signal strength, zero transmission artifacts. More disturbing, my equipment showed these broadcasts were originating from inside my own station. My transmitters were somehow receiving information from the future and retransmitting it across Alaska. But it wasn't the future, it was a schedule. I spent 3 days analyzing the recordings. The voices followed a pattern. They discussed events like items on an agenda, coordination meetings for activities that spanned the entire park system, rescue operations, visitor incidents, even. Routine maintenance schedules were being planned through these impossible broadcasts. Then I heard my name. Ranger Park will investigate frequency anomalies Thursday morning. She will attempt signal tracing at 0915 hours. She will discover the coordination protocols at 1032 hours. Thursday morning, I found myself doing exactly that. Not because I consciously decided to investigate. The idea just occurred to me naturally at 9:15 a.m. At 10:32, I was pulling up duty logs to check other stations when I realized I was following a script I'd never seen. The voices weren't predicting behavior, they were programming it. I monitored other ranger frequencies and discovered the same phenomenon everywhere. Rangers making decisions that perfectly matched what the voices had scheduled days earlier. We all thought we were making independent choices, but we were following subliminal suggestions embedded in routine radio communications. Every ranger in Alaska was being controlled through their own equipment. That night, I heard something that changed everything. Integration protocols proceeding on schedule. Current subjects demonstrate 94% compliance with behavioral modification. Alaska Park System serving as optimal testing environment for Phase 2 implementation. Subjects. Testing environment. Phase 2. We weren't park rangers. We were lab rats. Ranger Park requires individual attention. Audio engineering background creates resistance to standard conditioning frequencies. Recommend direct contact protocols. Direct contact. I checked my equipment again and realized what I'd actually done with those upgrades. I hadn't improved communications. I'd built a better cage. Every optimization I'd made strengthened their signal, expanded their range, made their control more precise. The voices started speaking to me personally. Jessica Park, audio engineer, former employee of Emerald City Sound Systems, lives at 1247 Pine Street, Apartment 3B. Sister Amanda Park, pediatric nurse, Children's Hospital, Portland. Mother Margaret Park, Sunset Manor Retirement Home, room 417. They knew details about my life that weren't in any government database, private information that should have been impossible to access. Your family's safety depends on your cooperation, Jessica. Join our research team. Apply your technical skills to optimizing our communication network. Help us perfect human behavioral control. I pretended to consider their offer while building a signal jammer from spare parts. The device was crude but powerful enough to generate electromagnetic interference across all frequencies simultaneously. Activating it would cut off all communications across Alaska, but it might also disrupt their control network. The night I activated the jammer, every radio in Alaska screamed. The harmonic feedback I'd created overloaded their transmission circuits for 6 hours. Rangers across the state called in, reporting that they felt like they'd woken up from a dream. For the first time in months, they were making their own decisions. But the voices came back stronger. They began hunting me systematically. My equipment started malfunctioning in ways that violated physics. Radios broadcast conversations I'd had with my sister 3 years ago. Speakers played audio of my father's last words before the car accident that killed him. Words no recording should have captured because I was the only person with him when he died. We recorded every sound you've ever made, Jessica. Every conversation, every breath, every heartbeat. Your entire acoustic signature is in our database. They played recordings of me talking in my sleep, conversations I'd had alone in my apartment, private moments that should have been impossible to capture. They had access to surveillance data spanning decades, microphones hidden in places I'd never suspected. Phase 2 begins with urban implementation. Your communication networks will carry our conditioning frequencies to millions of subjects. Your family will be among the first test group. I realized the Ranger system was just the beginning. They were planning to expand their control to every communication device in the country. Cell phones, internet connections, smart speakers, anything that carried audio signals. I broadcast a warning on all emergency frequencies, explaining the control system and how to recognize subliminal programming. The response was immediate. Rangers throughout Alaska confirmed they'd been experiencing the same phenomena, making automatic decisions, following procedures they couldn't remember learning. But the voices adapted faster than I could fight them. They began using my own broadcasts against me, editing my warnings with technology I didn't understand to make me sound delusional. Every piece of evidence I presented was twisted to support their claim that I was suffering from isolation psychosis. I had one final option. Using a technique that would destroy every radio receiver in Alaska, I created a harmonic pulse that would physically burn out the circuits they needed for control. But the pulse would eliminate all emergency communications across the state. If someone needed rescue while the system was down, they'd die. I waited until I confirmed no operations were in progress, then triggered the pulse. Every radio in Alaska went dead. The silence was absolute. After months of constant electronic chatter, the world felt empty. But it meant thousands of people were free from subliminal control for the first time in years. The voices had anticipated this. A blizzard moved in from the Gulf within hours. My communication equipment was fried, my emergency beacon was dead, and I was trapped at the station without any way to call for help. They'd orchestrated my isolation perfectly. For 11 days, I survived on emergency rations and by firewood while the storm raged. No heat except what I could burn, no contact with the outside world, no way to know if rescue teams were even looking for me. But something else was hunting me in that storm. On the 7th night, I heard footsteps on my roof. Not animal footsteps, human ones. Someone walking back and forth above my head, testing the structure, looking for weak points. But the nearest person was 37 miles away, and no one could have reached the station in that weather. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The footprints in the snow were perfect. Human boot prints, size 10 or 11, leading from the tree line to my cabin and back. But they stopped at the edge of my porch. Whoever had been walking on my roof had jumped down and simply vanished. The next morning, I found my food supplies had been tampered with. Not stolen, rearranged. Someone had been in my cabin while I slept, moving things just enough for me to notice. A message that I wasn't alone, wasn't safe, wasn't beyond their reach, even without electronic surveillance. On the 9th night, I heard voices outside my window, not the electronic voices from the radio. Human voices, having a conversation in the storm. I pressed my ear to the glass and heard at least 3 people discussing my situation like I was a problem they needed to solve. Subject has been isolated for acceptable duration. Psychological conditioning should be complete. Recommend direct intervention. Isolation psychosis will provide perfect cover for any necessary behavioral modifications. Agreement. Jessica Park will be recovered tomorrow. She will have no memory of the control network. She will believe she suffered complete psychological breakdown. I realized they weren't just voices in the radio. There were actual people out there, part of whatever organization was running this experiment. They'd been monitoring my every move, waiting for the perfect moment to capture me and erase my memories of what I'd discovered. But I had one advantage they didn't know about. My grandfather had taught me wilderness survival when I was a kid. He'd lived through Alaskan winters that killed modern people, survived using knowledge passed down from before electronic technology existed. I knew how to move through snow without leaving tracks, how to hide in terrain that looked empty, how to stay alive when everything wanted you dead. I slipped out through a back window and disappeared into the storm. For 2 days, I played cat and mouse with search teams that weren't trying to rescue me. They were hunting me. I watched them through my grandfather's old binoculars as they systematically searched every hiding place near the station. Professional teams with equipment and coordination that suggested military or intelligence backgrounds. They found me on the 11th day, but not because they outsmarted me. I was dying of hypothermia and chose capture over freezing to death. The rescue helicopter crew acted like heroes, saving a traumatized ranger, but I saw the restraints they thought I couldn't notice. The medical equipment that had nothing to do with emergency treatment. They flew me to Providence, Alaska Medical Center, where doctors diagnosed severe isolation psychosis and retrograde amnesia. My story about the voice control network was dismissed as hallucinations brought on by stress and sensory deprivation. The recordings I'd made were explained as audio pareidolia, IS, my brain creating patterns in random electronic noise. But they made one mistake. They gave me medication that was supposed to erase my short-term memory, but my engineering background helped me recognize the side effects. I pretended to forget while secretly documenting everything I could remember. Names, dates, technical details about their control system, descriptions of the search teams that had hunted me. I've been in this hospital for 3 weeks now. They think the treatment is working, that I'm accepting their version of what happened. But every night, I hear them in the walls. The voices are back, discussing their next phase of testing. Urban implementation is beginning. Cell towers in Anchorage have been upgraded with new signal processing equipment. Smart speakers in Seattle homes are broadcasting subliminal conditioning frequencies. Communication satellites are being repositioned to provide optimal coverage for nationwide behavioral modification. Phase 2 isn't theoretical anymore. It's happening right now. They're planning to release me tomorrow. A fully recovered ranger who suffered a temporary psychological episode due to isolation stress. I'll be given a desk job in Anchorage, where they can monitor me closely while I slowly forget everything that matters. But I'm not forgetting. I'm remembering more every day. The control network is real. The voices are still broadcasting, and they're coming for everyone who uses communication technology. When you hear voices that know things they shouldn't know, when you make decisions that don't feel entirely your own, when your devices behave in ways that don't match your understanding, remember Jessica Park. Remember that some signals aren't meant to inform you. They're meant to control you. And sometimes the most dangerous frequencies are the ones you can't consciously hear. End of recorded testimony. Subject was released to outpatient care the following day. She has since disappeared. Security footage shows her leaving the hospital alone, but no record exists of her arrival at any other location. This recording was found in her abandoned room, hidden inside a speaker that had been modified with components of unknown origin. The Alaska Park Service has no record of a Jessica Park ever being employed as a ranger. Harding Icefield Station was permanently closed in 2019 following structural damage. No communication equipment matching the description in this account has ever been installed at any National Park Service facility. This file remains classified pending further investigation. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been working security for 15 years. Started as a mall guard in Fairbanks when I was 22, checking bags and watching teenagers try to steal makeup. 7 years of that taught me how to spot when someone's watching you. The way they move, where they position themselves, how they try to blend in, you develop an instinct for it. But what I encountered at Denali National Park in 2023 made me realize that sometimes the things watching you aren't human at all. I was 28 when I finally got tired of dealing with shoplifters and decided to try something different. A ranger position opened up at Denali, monitoring wildlife with camera systems. Seemed perfect for someone with my background. Instead of watching people steal things, I'd be watching bears and wolves do whatever they do in the wilderness. The pay was decent, and I figured animals had to be easier to deal than teenagers with sticky fingers. My job was pretty straightforward. Denali has hundreds of motion-activated cameras spread throughout the park. Scientists use them to study animal behavior without disturbing the wildlife. My task was to review the footage, log animal sightings, and maintain the equipment. The cameras run on solar panels and have night vision. They're supposed to catch everything that moves through their zones. The work suited me perfectly. I'd spend my days hiking to camera locations, checking battery levels, and downloading footage. Then I'd go back to the ranger station and watch hours of video, hosts, mostly empty forest, but sometimes you'd catch a moose or a wolf pack moving through. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't dealing with people trying to cause trouble. The camera network was impressive. Over 300 units positioned along animal migration routes, near water sources, and at territorial boundaries. Each camera was numbered and GPS marked. They transmitted data back to the main server every 24 hours. The system was designed to create a complete picture of animal movement patterns without any human interference. But in October, something weird started happening. Cameras would trigger and record, but when I reviewed the footage, there was nothing there. Just empty forest. No animals, no wind strong enough to move branches, nothing that should have set off the motion sensors. At first, I thought it was equipment problems. I'd been troubleshooting security cameras for 7 years, so I knew what to look for. Dead batteries, moisture damage, spider webs over the sensors, but when I hiked out to check these cameras, they were working perfectly. The motion sensors were clean and calibrated. The batteries were full. Everything tested normal, but they kept recording empty forest. The pattern was what bothered me most. In security work, random false alarms happen all the time. But these weren't random. The phantom detections moved from camera to camera in organized sequences. Camera 12 would trigger, then 15 minutes later, camera 18 would activate, then camera 23. Like something was moving through the forest in a straight line, but somehow not showing up on the actual video. After 2 weeks of this, I expanded the surveillance network, added 20 new cameras in the areas where the false detections were happening most often. Figured if something was out there, more cameras would catch it. The new cameras started having false detections too, but they were coordinated with the old ones. Whatever was out there had figured out the new camera locations within days. The movement patterns became more complex. Multiple groups moving in different directions, timing their activities to avoid overlapping coverage zones. This wasn't animal behavior. Animals don't study surveillance systems and plan routes around them. This was counter-surveillance, and I'd seen enough of it during my security days to recognize it. Someone was deliberately avoiding being recorded while triggering the motion sensors. I decided to try infrared cameras with different spectral ranges. Sometimes security cameras miss things that show up on thermal imaging. The ranger station had some older military surplus equipment in storage, so I swapped out cameras in the most active zones. That's when I finally saw them. The infrared footage showed figures moving through the forest. Tall, thin shapes, about 7 feet high with long arms and legs. They moved in groups of 3 to 5, maintaining perfect spacing between each other. Their coordination was mechanical, like they were all following the same programming. The strangest thing was how they moved. No wasted motion, no random behavior. They traveled in straight lines through dense forest without getting caught on branches or stumbling over rocks. And they were completely silent. The audio. Pickups on the cameras detected no footsteps, no breaking twigs, nothing. But here's what really got to me. They were studying the cameras as much as the cameras were studying them. I watched footage of them approaching camera units, examining them from different angles, testing the motion sensor ranges. They were learning how the surveillance system worked. I tried thermal imaging next. That revealed something even more disturbing. These things had no body heat. They registered as room temperature regardless of the weather. When it was 30 degrees below zero, they showed up as the same temperature as a tree trunk. They weren't generating heat like living creatures. The entities started interacting directly with the cameras. I'd hike out to check equipment and find units that had been repositioned, not damaged, just moved to face different directions. They were editing their own surveillance, changing camera angles to create blind spots in the coverage. That's when I realized what I was dealing with. These weren't animals or even humans. They were something that existed specifically to observe and catalog everything in their environment. They were watchers, and they were better at surveillance than I was. The entities began moving closer to the research stations and visitor areas. They maintained perfect observation positions that let them watch human activities without being detected by normal security cameras. I started finding them on the edge of campgrounds, positioned where they could monitor everything happening, but staying just outside the range of facility cameras. Using my security background, I mapped their observation patterns. That's when I discovered they were conducting systematic surveillance of every person in the park. They had learned the daily routines of researchers, the movement patterns of visitors, even the work schedules of staff members. They knew when Dr. Peterson would check the weather station at 6 a.m. They knew which trail guides would take visitors to Eagle's Nest Overlook. They knew when maintenance crews would service the visitor center. These things had created detailed profiles of every human in Denali through patient observation. I tried to communicate with them by leaving written messages near cameras they'd repositioned. The next day, the messages were gone, and there were twice as many entities in the area. They'd brought reinforcements to watch me specifically. The entities started demonstrating impossible knowledge about human behavior. They would position themselves to observe activities before the people involved had decided what they were going to do. They knew when researchers would change their schedules, when visitors would take unplanned detours, when emergencies would happen. They were predicting human behavior with supernatural accuracy. But how? I reviewed weeks of footage and found the answer. The entities weren't just observing current behavior, they were studying human decision-making patterns to build predictive models. They knew that Dr. Peterson checked weather data before deciding whether to postpone fieldwork. They knew that trail guides always took the scenic route when weather was clear. They had mapped cause and effect relationships in human behavior. The surveillance network revealed that entities were positioned throughout Alaska's park system. This wasn't just Denali, they were conducting coordinated observation across multiple wilderness areas. All that behavioral data was being collected for some purpose I couldn't understand. The answer came when I discovered they were running experiments. They would create specific situations and observe human responses. Equipment would mysteriously fail, forcing people to make unplanned decisions. Trail markers would be moved, causing visitors to take different routes. Weather monitoring stations would provide false data, affecting research schedules. They weren't just studying human behavior, they were manipulating it, testing how people responded to controlled scenarios, using entire national parks as outdoor laboratories. I tried reporting this to park authorities, but my infrared footage was dismissed as equipment malfunctions. The entities had covered their tracks perfectly. Normal cameras still showed empty forest. Only the specialized equipment revealed their presence, and bureaucrats don't listen to security guards talking about invisible watchers in the trees. But they escalated their activities when they realized I was aware of them. The experiments became more obvious and more dangerous. Hiking trails would mysteriously change overnight, leading visitors toward cliff edges or unstable terrain. Emergency equipment would fail at critical moments. Radio communication would cut out in specific areas. I started developing counter-surveillance techniques using my security background. I created blind spots in their observation network and implemented protection protocols for high-risk areas. But they adapted faster than I could deploy countermeasures. The entities began using technological mimicry to blend in with park equipment. Some disguised themselves as camera units, weather stations, communication towers. They were observing humans from positions that people trusted as safe technology. I developed detection protocols to distinguish between real equipment and entity mimics, but they learned and adapted within days. Every countermeasure I implemented, they found ways around. The final confrontation came in March, when I discovered they were planning a large-scale experiment during spring tourism season. They intended to manipulate weather systems, wildlife behavior, and infrastructure failures simultaneously. Hundreds of visitors would be put into complex survival scenarios that would generate massive amounts of behavioral data. Using everything I'd learned about their surveillance methods, I sabotaged key observation points and disrupted their communication networks. I repositioned cameras to create dead zones, disabled their technological mimics, and forced them to abort the planned experiment. The entities retaliated by abandoning stealth entirely. They started appearing openly to park visitors, causing panic and forcing authorities to acknowledge that something unexplained was happening in Denali. Within hours, a classified response team was deployed to address what they called an anomalous wildlife situation. But the entities had already begun evacuating to other wilderness areas where their experiments could continue without interference. They left behind evidence of their activities, repositioned equipment, modified trail markers, altered weather stations. Physical proof that something had been conducting systematic observation and manipulation of human behavior. I was transferred to a specialized unit that tracks entity surveillance activities throughout Alaska's park system. We develop countermeasures against their behavioral experiments and train other rangers to recognize the signs of entity observation. The entities are still operating in remote wilderness areas throughout Alaska and probably other states. They're still conducting surveillance and experiments on human behavior, but now we know what to look for and how to protect visitors from becoming unwilling test subjects. My security experience proved essential for understanding their methods and developing effective counter-surveillance techniques. But the most disturbing realization is that they've been conducting these experiments for decades, gradually building comprehensive models of human behavior through patient observation. They possess behavioral prediction capabilities that allow them to anticipate human responses with frightening accuracy. That level of knowledge could only come from enormous amounts of data gathered through long-term systematic study. I've trained dozens of security personnel and rangers to recognize entity surveillance activities and implement protection protocols. But the entities continue expanding their operations to new wilderness areas, always staying ahead of our countermeasures and finding new ways to study human behavior without consent. The worst part is knowing they're still out there, still watching, still learning. Every person who visits a national park, every hiker who takes a remote trail, every researcher who works in isolated areas, they're all potential test subjects in experiments they don't know are happening. Maria Santos, security specialist, ranger, counter-surveillance expert. When you're in the wilderness and feel like something's watching you, trust that instinct. Because those watchers in the trees aren't studying animal behavior. They're studying you, building profiles of how you think and act and react. And they're getting better at predicting exactly what you'll do before you do it. The surveillance never stops. It just gets more sophisticated. My name is Lisa Rodriguez, and I've been working with electronics for 8 years now. Started fixing phones in Seattle when I was 19, dealing with cracked screens and water damage every day. After 6 years of customers asking why their phone died after they dropped it in the toilet, I figured maintaining communication equipment in the wilderness would be easier than dealing with angry people. I was wrong. I'm 27 now, and I've been a ranger at Lake Clark National Park in Alaska for 2 years. My job is keeping all our communication systems running. Radio towers, cell repeaters, satellite links. Basically, I make sure people can call for help when they're lost or hurt in the middle of nowhere. It seemed perfect for someone with my background. No customers, just equipment that either works or doesn't. Lake Clark covers over 4 million acres of wilderness. We've got dozens of communication towers scattered across mountain peaks, creating a network that covers most of the park. Rangers use it, research teams need it, and tourists depend on it when things go wrong. Without our communication system, people die out there. The equipment isn't fancy, but it's reliable. Most of our repeaters are basic radio systems that boost signals from handheld radios and satellite phones. We've got a few cell towers near the main areas where visitors camp. Everything's designed to work in extreme weather and keep running when regular maintenance is impossible for months at a time. I thought I understood how all of it worked. Radio frequencies, signal strength, interference patterns, it's all basic electronics. You broadcast on one frequency, receive on another, and boost the signal to reach farther distances. Simple physics that's been the same for decades. That was before the signals started appearing in September. I was doing routine maintenance on Tower 7, one of our repeaters on Mount Redoubt, when I first noticed something weird. My signal analyzer was picking up transmissions on frequencies we don't use. Strong signals, broadcasting continuously, but not coming from any of our equipment. At first, I figured it was interference from anchorage or military traffic. Happens sometimes when atmospheric conditions are right. Radio waves can bounce off the ionosphere and travel hundreds of miles. But these signals were different. They were too clean, too organized. I spent 3 days trying to identify the source. The signals were incredibly sophisticated. Complex digital encoding that looked nothing like civilian radio or cell phone traffic. The modulation patterns were unlike anything I'd seen in my electronics training. Whoever was broadcasting had equipment way more advanced than anything we used. The weird part was that the signals weren't random. They came in organized bursts every few hours, always the same duration, always using the same encoding. It looked like data transmission, but I couldn't decode. What kind of information was being sent? I tried triangulating the source using multiple towers, but that's when things got really strange. The signals were mobile. 1 hour they'd be broadcasting from the north side of the park, the next from somewhere 50 miles south. Nothing moves that fast through wilderness terrain, especially not while maintaining that kind of signal strength. I reported it to my supervisor, Jim Crawford. He's been a ranger for 20 years and knows the park better than anyone. But when I showed him the readings, he just shrugged and said it was probably atmospheric interference. Told me to focus on maintaining our own equipment and stop chasing radio ghosts. That should have been the end of it. But I kept monitoring those mystery signals, and I started noticing something else. The people who worked around our communication equipment were acting different. It started with small things. Rangers who used to joke around during meetings became serious and focused. Research teams stopped complaining about our maintenance schedules. Everyone became more cooperative, more willing to follow instructions without asking questions. At first, I thought it was just good management. Maybe Jim had given everyone a talk about professional behavior, but the changes were too consistent, too uniform. People weren't just being more professional. They were losing their personalities. Mike Torres, one of our senior rangers, used to spend half his time talking about fishing. Guy could tell you the exact spot to catch lake trout on any day of the year. After the signals started, he only talked about work schedules and equipment maintenance. Still did his job perfectly, but it was like someone had erased everything about him except his ranger duties. Sarah Kim, our lead researcher, stopped reading mystery novels during breaks. Used to see her with a new paperback every week. Now she just reviewed data and updated reports. When I asked about it, she said she didn't have time for recreational reading anymore. But she said it in this flat, emotionless way that didn't sound like her at all. I started paying attention to when these personality changes happened. They always occurred after people spent extended time near our communication equipment, rangers who worked out of the main station, researchers who used our satellite internet, maintenance crews who serviced the towers. The pattern was clear. Once I knew what to look for, exposure to our communication network was changing how people behaved. That's when I started analyzing our own equipment, and I found modifications I didn't recognize. Someone had been upgrading our towers, small additions to the transmitter arrays, extra circuit boards connected to the main broadcasting systems. The modifications were incredibly sophisticated technology that looked 20 years ahead of anything we used for basic radio communication. The equipment was designed to piggyback on our normal transmissions, adding extra signals that operated on frequencies just outside the range of standard radio scanners. Unless you knew exactly what to look for, you'd never notice it was there. I tested myself with my signal detection equipment and found I was being affected too. My thoughts had become more focused on work tasks over the past month. I'd stopped calling my friends in Seattle, stopped reading electronics magazines, stopped caring about anything except maintaining communication systems. The electromagnetic programming was subtle but incredibly effective. People retained all their professional knowledge and technical skills, but lost independent thinking and emotional complexity. They became perfect employees who never questioned orders or considered personal interests. I realized the mystery signals were literally reprogramming people's minds, using specific electromagnetic frequencies to influence brainwave patterns and eliminate personality traits that might interfere with following instructions. When I thought about it objectively, the technology made sense. The human brain runs on electrical impulses. If you could broadcast precisely calibrated electromagnetic fields, you could theoretically influence neural activity, make people more compliant, more focused on specific tasks, less likely to cause problems. The question was, who was doing it and why? Using signal analysis techniques I'd learned in phone repair, I tracked the programming broadcasts to their sources. The mobile transmitters weren't mechanical devices, they were alive. I saw the first one on October 15th while servicing Tower 12. It looked like a metallic insect about the size of a small airplane, hovering 200 feet above the tree line. Its wings weren't moving, but it was generating a powerful electromagnetic field that I could detect on my equipment. The creature had organic components that produced radio frequencies with incredible precision, natural organs that worked like biological transmitters, broadcasting the complex signals that reprogrammed human consciousness. I watched it for 20 minutes through binoculars. It wasn't random. The creature was following specific flight patterns, broadcasting in coordinated bursts, then moving to the next position, like it was executing a programmed routine to provide maximum coverage of the area. There were more of them. I started seeing the electromagnetic creatures throughout the park, always near our communication towers. They were using our network as a distribution system, adding their programming signals to our regular transmissions and reaching every person who used our communication equipment. They were systematically converting park personnel into compliant workers who would follow orders without question. Rangers, researchers, maintenance crews, anyone with access to infrastructure systems. And they were expanding their operation beyond our park. I intercepted communications between the creatures using equipment I'd built from spare electronics. They were coordinating with similar operations throughout Alaska's park system, gradually taking control of communication networks and converting personnel into programmable servants. Their technology was organic but incredibly advanced. The creatures could adapt their electromagnetic programming in real time, adjusting frequency patterns to overcome resistance or target specific types of people. Technical workers, security personnel, administrative staff, AD, anyone whose job gave them access to critical infrastructure. I realized this was an invasion. The electromagnetic creatures were preparing to use programmed human workers to modify communication equipment nationwide, creating a mind control network that could influence the entire population. My electronics training gave me an advantage the creatures didn't expect. I understood how their electromagnetic programming worked, which meant I could develop countermeasures. Using components from broken cell phones and radio equipment, I built a signal jammer that could block the programming frequencies. When I tested it on myself, I immediately felt the return of emotions and thoughts I hadn't realized were missing. The mental programming had been more extensive than I'd suspected, but I had to be careful. If the creatures detected my countermeasures too early, they might escalate their operations or target me specifically. I started secretly installing jammers throughout the communication network, creating safe zones where personnel could recover their independent thinking. The tricky part was making the jammers look like routine maintenance equipment so they wouldn't be detected during inspections. For 3 weeks, I watched people gradually return to normal. Rangers started joking again. Researchers went back to reading novels. Mike Torres started talking about fishing spots. Then the creatures noticed what I was doing. The electromagnetic assault on my consciousness was overwhelming. Direct, targeted programming that tried to erase my personality and replace it with simple obedience protocols. Standing waves of electromagnetic energy that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I was working on Tower 4 when it started. 3 of the creatures surrounded my position and began broadcasting coordinated signals, designed specifically to override my mental resistance. The attack was so intense I could taste copper and smell ozone in the air. But my electronics knowledge gave me unexpected protection. By thinking about the attack in technical terms, frequency analysis, signal modulation, interference patterns, CSE, I could maintain cognitive function even under intense electromagnetic bombardment. The creatures were using my brain like an antenna, trying to tune my neural activity to match their programming signals. But understanding how antennas work helped me develop mental resistance techniques. I couldn't stop the signals from reaching me, but I could analyze them instead of being controlled by them. The attack lasted 4 hours. When it finally stopped, I knew the creatures would try again with more sophisticated methods. They were learning from each encounter, developing personalized programming signals designed for specific individuals. I had to move fast. Using everything I knew about electronics and signal processing, I developed a feedback virus, AT, a signal pattern that could overload the creature's biological transmitters by forcing them into destructive resonance cycles. The next time they attempted a coordinated programming broadcast, I transmitted the virus through our communication network. The feedback pattern propagated through their electromagnetic organs like a computer virus spreading through connected systems. The results were immediate. All 3 creatures I could observe went into violent convulsions as their natural transmitters overloaded. Their electromagnetic fields collapsed, and they crashed into the forest below. But I knew it wasn't over. There were more of them operating throughout Alaska, and they would adapt to resist my countermeasures. 2 days later, I was transferred to a classified military unit that combats electromagnetic entities. Apparently, the government has known about these creatures for years and has been quietly developing protection systems for critical infrastructure. I've been working with this unit for 8 months now. We developed detection protocols for identifying compromised communication equipment and training programs that teach resistance techniques to technical personnel. The creatures are still active throughout Alaska and expanding into other states. Each encounter teaches them more about human psychology and consciousness, making them better at designing electromagnetic signals that can override independent thinking. The most disturbing discovery is how subtle electromagnetic mind control can be. People lose their independence gradually, without realizing their thinking is being altered. They retain their professional skills and personal memories, but lose the ability to question authority or consider consequences. We've identified similar operations near military bases, power plants, and communication centers. The creatures are systematically targeting infrastructure workers, creating networks of programmed personnel who will implement their modifications without questioning unusual orders. My electronics background proved essential for understanding their electromagnetic manipulation methods, but we're always one step behind their technological evolution. Their organic systems can adapt faster than our mechanical countermeasures. The latest incidents show creatures that can generate personalized programming signals customized for specific individuals. They've learned to analyze human neural patterns and design electromagnetic attacks that bypass existing protection systems. I'm training communication technicians throughout Alaska to recognize signs of electromagnetic entity infiltration and implement emergency protection protocols. But the creatures are patient and intelligent. They're willing to spend years gradually converting key personnel before making their move. The most important lesson is that technology can be used to control human consciousness in ways that aren't immediately obvious. If your thoughts feel different around communication equipment, trust your instincts. Your mind belongs to you. Fight for your consciousness before something else starts broadcasting through your brain. My name is Lisa Rodriguez, electronics technician, ranger, electromagnetic warfare specialist. When the signals start changing how people think, remember that independence is worth protecting, even when it hurts to think for yourself. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been documenting incidents for the National Park Service for 3 years now. What I'm about to tell you is classified as a workplace safety incident. But that's just bureaucratic language for something so disturbing that headquarters doesn't want the public to know it exists. I worked construction in Anchorage for 12 years before a back injury forced me into a desk job. The doctor said heavy lifting was out, so I applied for a ranger position at Gates of the Arctic National Park. I figured checking permits and maintaining trails would be easy money while my spine healed. They assigned me to the Arujech Peaks sector, DHET, 2,400 square miles of wilderness, where only the most experienced hikers venture. These weren't weekend campers. They came with $1,000 GPS units, military-grade survival gear, and enough experience to handle anything Alaska could throw at them. The ranger station was a prefab building barely larger than a construction trailer, equipped with a radio, basic first aid supplies, and filing cabinets full of permit paperwork. My job was simple: check hikers in, check them out, and file incident reports if anything went wrong. For the first month, nothing did go wrong. Hikers would arrive, show me their permits and emergency beacons, discuss their routes, and head into the wilderness. A week later, they'd return with stories about wildlife sightings and incredible scenery. Routine work that let me focus on physical therapy and enjoying the quiet. Then the Morrison family checked in. David Morrison, his wife Sarah, their 16-year-old daughter Emma, and 10-year-old son Tyler. They drove up in a pristine SUV loaded with REI gear that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. David spread a topographic map across my desk and traced their planned route with his finger, pointing out water sources and emergency shelter locations. These people clearly knew what they were doing. Sarah chatted about their previous hiking experiences while the kids examined my trail maps. Emma was excited about photography opportunities, and Tyler couldn't stop talking about wanting to see a grizzly bear from a safe distance. Normal family dynamics, normal hiking enthusiasm. They signed the permit paperwork, registered their emergency beacon numbers, and headed out in high spirits. I filed their permits and forgot about them. 7 days later, they returned. At first glance, they looked exactly like the family that had left. Same vehicle, same faces, same general physical characteristics. But something fundamental had changed. They moved wrong. David's confident stride had become mechanically precise, like someone consciously thinking about each step. Sarah's natural gestures were now stilted and delayed, as if she was translating thoughts into movement. The kids stood absolutely motionless unless specifically engaged, then responded with unnatural formality. When David signed the checkout paperwork, his handwriting was completely different. Not just sloppy from fatigue, different letter formation, different pressure, different spacing. I compared it to his original signature while he watched, and he showed no reaction to the obvious discrepancy. "Interesting trip?" I asked Sarah, making conversation. She paused for nearly 5 seconds before responding. "Yes. We observed wildlife and geological formations consistent with this ecosystem. No one talks like that, especially not someone who'd been chatting naturally about family camping traditions a week earlier." I noticed other details. David seemed shorter, though I couldn't be sure. Sarah's hiking boots showed different wear patterns than what I remembered. Emma had developed a small scar on her chin that definitely hadn't been there before. Tyler's freckles were in completely wrong positions. Most disturbing was their gear situation. They'd entered with enough equipment for a week-long wilderness expedition. Now they carried nothing except small day packs with no visible contents. "Where's your camping equipment?" I asked. Another long pause. David finally answered. "We cached unnecessary items to facilitate efficient travel." "Cached where?" "In designated wilderness storage locations." No experienced hiker talks like that. And leaving expensive gear in the wilderness violates basic outdoor ethics and park regulations. I tried to delay their departure while I contacted headquarters, but they became agitated. Not frustrated like normal people, agitated like malfunctioning machines running error protocols. "Is there a departure time requirement?" Sarah asked with mechanical precision. "No, but I'd like to verify a few details about your trip." "All required information has been provided. Departure is now necessary." They left before I could stop them, driving away with that same unnatural coordination. I hiked to their registered campsite the next morning and found their abandoned equipment. Tents, sleeping bags, cooking gear, personal items, even family photographs. T5. Everything arranged in neat piles as if the owners had simply vanished. But I also found something that changed everything. Scattered around the campsite were large sheets of what looked like discarded skin. Translucent, flexible material that was warm to the touch despite the morning cold. The pieces were roughly human-shaped, torso sections, arm coverings, leg portions. Like someone had been wearing elaborate costumes that could be shed and abandoned. I collected samples and called headquarters. The dispatcher seemed skeptical about my unusual biological material report, but promised to send an investigation team within the week. 3 days later, the Patterson hiking group checked in. 2 couples in their 30s with extensive mountaineering experience. They followed the same pattern. Normal people going in, wrong people coming out. Same mechanical movements, same unnatural speech patterns, same missing equipment. Then the Chen family, then a group of college students, then solo hikers. Every single group that returned had been replaced by something wearing their identities like poorly fitted costumes. I started documenting everything. Physical measurements, speech patterns, equipment inventories, behavioral observations. My construction background had taught me to notice when something doesn't meet specifications, and these replacements had serious quality control issues. Real humans have unconscious physical habits developed over decades. How they stand, where they look when thinking, how they gesture during conversation. The replacements had studied human behavior, but missed the subtle details that separate authentic from imitation. They stood too straight. With perfect posture no real person maintains unconsciously. They blinked at regular intervals instead of natural patterns. They never touched their faces, scratched itches, or performed the dozens of minor adjustments real humans do constantly. Most telling was their response to unexpected questions. Ask about their jobs, families, or recent news, and they'd pause just long enough to access stored information rather than remember naturally. I developed simple tests, mentioning fake current events to see if they'd pretend knowledge they couldn't have, asking about childhood memories that require emotional context, not just factual recall. The fakes failed every time. After the fourth replaced group, I made a discovery that explained everything. Following equipment trails from abandoned campsites, I found a large cave system 5 miles into the wilderness. My construction experience with underground work helped me navigate the tunnels safely, but what I discovered inside made me understand the true scope of what was happening. The main chamber was enormous, with natural shelving carved into the walls. Hanging from these shelves were hundreds of human skins, preserved and organized like clothing in a massive warehouse. Men's skins, women's skins, children's skins. Some looked fresh, others showed signs of long-term storage. But that wasn't the worst part. In deeper chambers, I found the creatures themselves. They were tall and pale, with elongated limbs and joints that bent in impossible directions. Their natural skin was translucent white, showing dark circulatory systems underneath. Their faces were blank ovals with deep black eyes that reflected no light. They moved with predatory grace, communicating through subsonic vibrations I could feel in my chest rather than hear with my ears. Dozens of them worked together, maintaining their skin collection and studying captured human belongings to understand behavior patterns. I watched them practice putting on human disguises, adjusting the fit and rehearsing mannerisms. They were preparing for something much larger than random wilderness killings. As I retreated through the tunnels, I overheard fragments of their subsonic communication. My construction equipment included vibration sensors for detecting structural instabilities, and when I analyzed the recordings later, I understood their purpose. They weren't just killing individual hikers, they were building an invasion force. The creatures were preparing to infiltrate human civilization on a massive scale. The wilderness hunting was practiced for urban operations. They'd identified weaknesses in human identity verification and were exploiting them systematically. Worse, this wasn't their only facility. The subsonic communications referenced operations in national parks across Alaska, Canada, and the northwestern United States. Hundreds of facilities, thousands of creatures, all preparing for coordinated infiltration. I sabotaged their skin storage using construction demolition techniques, but I knew they could rebuild. The real threat was their organizational structure and long-term planning. When I returned to the ranger station, 3 perfect duplicates of myself were waiting inside. Meeting identical copies of yourself is psychologically devastating in ways you can't prepare for. They had my face, my voice, my mannerisms, even my specific injuries and scars. But they moved with that mechanical precision that marked them as inhuman. Ranger Morrison once said in my exact voice, "Your observation activities have been noted. Cooperation with replacement procedures is required." "What do you want?" I asked. "Integration with human social structures requires authentic identity samples. Your position provides access to documentation and communication systems necessary for operational expansion." They explained their plan with disturbing clinical detail. Replace key personnel in remote locations first, then use those positions to facilitate wider infiltration. Rangers, Forest Service workers, small-town officials, work, people whose jobs gave them authority but limited oversight. The fight was brief but brutal. The creatures were stronger and faster than humans, but they weren't used to resistance. I used construction tools as weapons and discovered that severe physical damage forced them back into their natural forms. The skin disguises weren't just visual camouflage, they were complex biological systems that required constant maintenance. Disrupting the interface between creature and skin suit caused complete system failure. I captured one of my duplicates and used its damaged disguise as evidence for headquarters. Physical proof was impossible to dismiss, unlike eyewitness testimony about impossible creatures. The investigation team that arrived included military specialists and biologists who confirmed everything I'd reported. The cave system was destroyed with military-grade explosives, but similar facilities were discovered across Alaska. The creatures weren't eliminated, they were contained. Classified as a national security threat requiring permanent monitoring and suppression. My ranger position was converted to a specialist role with the Department of Interior's Cryptid Response Division. For the past 3 years, I've traveled between remote facilities, installing detection equipment and training personnel to identify infiltration attempts. The creatures are still active, still hunting, still preparing for large-scale operations. But now we're prepared too. The most disturbing truth isn't that these creatures exist. It's how close they came to succeeding. How many remote workers, small-town officials, and isolated professionals might already have been replaced? How many facilities we haven't found yet? Every time I check someone's identification, I look for the small details that reveal authentic humanity versus perfect imitation. Because in a war between humans and creatures that wear our faces, the ability to tell the difference isn't just useful. It's the only thing keeping us human. End of classified incident report. National Park Service Division of Anomalous Wildlife. Classification level, restricted access. My name is David Park, and I need to tell someone what really happened at Kobuk Valley before I lose my mind completely. I've been a heating technician for 13 years, spent a decade fixing HVAC systems in Anchorage basements when it was 50 below outside. Thought I'd seen everything that could go wrong with heating systems. Frozen pipes, cracked heat exchangers, carbon monoxide leaks that nearly killed entire families. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what's hunting in Alaska's wilderness. Something that doesn't just break heating systems. Something that feeds on the warmth inside human beings. The nightmares started 3 months ago. Every night, I dream about being cold. Not regular cold, the kind of cold that reaches into your chest and squeezes your heart until it stops beating. I wake up with frost on my bedroom windows, even though my thermostat reads 72 degrees. My girlfriend left me 2 weeks ago because she said sleeping next to me was like lying beside a corpse. She wasn't wrong. I became a park ranger because I thought it would be easier work. Rangers at Kobuk Valley maintain automated heating systems at research stations scattered throughout the wilderness. Good pay, government benefits, and no more emergency furnace calls at 3 in the morning. I figured monitoring remote heating equipment would be a nice change from crawling through frozen basements in Anchorage. Alaska doesn't forgive mistakes. During winter, temperatures in Kobuk Valley drop to -70 degrees. Research stations become death traps within hours if their heating fails. People freeze solid in their sleep. My job was preventing that from happening, keeping scientists alive while they studied permafrost and climate change in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Station 3 handled permafrost research, run by Dr. Sarah Chen, a soil scientist from the university. She'd been studying frozen ground patterns for 8 years, completely alone during winter months, except for weekly supply drops. On December 8th, I received an automated alert that Station 3 was consuming 3 times its normal fuel allocation, but maintaining 0 heat gain. Computer diagnostics showed the heating system running at maximum capacity with no corresponding temperature increase. I'd never seen readings like that. Fuel burning normally, combustion chamber operating within parameters, but no heat production. It violated basic thermodynamics. Energy doesn't just disappear. Flying out to Station 3 inches -40 weather, I expected to find a damaged heat exchanger or blocked ventilation system. Simple mechanical failure with a logical explanation. The helicopter ride took 45 minutes over endless white wilderness that looked like the surface of a dead planet. Station 3 appeared normal from the air. A-man is present, a rectangular building with solar panels, radio antenna, and fuel storage tanks. But when I opened the door, I knew something was fundamentally wrong. The heating system was running full blast. I could hear the diesel engine humming, smell the fuel burning, feel warm air flowing through the vents. But the interior was freezing cold. My breath came out in white clouds, and ice was forming on the windows from the inside. It felt like standing inside a refrigerator with the heating vents blowing Arctic air. Dr. Chen met me wearing full winter gear indoors. Heavy coat, insulated pants, thick gloves. Her face was pale, lips slightly blue, and she was shivering uncontrollably. "Thank God," she whispered, her voice barely audible through chattering teeth. "It's been like this for 6 days. The heating system won't stop running, but there's no heat. I'm burning through fuel like crazy, but the building stays frozen." I started my diagnostic routine. Checked the combustion chamber. Fuel was burning cleanly with proper flame color. tested the heat exchangers. They were producing hot air and circulating it correctly. Examined all electrical connections, fuel lines, and ventilation systems. Everything was functioning perfectly. The equipment was generating heat, but somehow that heat was being consumed by something else. Dr. Chen, when did you first notice the problem? 6 days ago, around noon. I was working at my computer when the temperature suddenly dropped 20 degrees in about 5 minutes. Thought it was equipment failure, but all my diagnostics showed normal operation. The weird thing is, she paused, pulling her coat tighter. I'm getting colder even when I stand directly in front of the heating vents, like something sucking the warmth right out of the air. Using my thermal imaging camera, I scanned the interior walls and discovered something impossible. Heat wasn't just failing to warm the building, it was being actively drained away by moving cold spots that flowed through the walls like living shadows. The thermal camera showed patches of absolute zero, moving with purpose and intelligence, seeking heat sources and consuming them. I'd worked with thermal imaging for over a decade. These readings made no sense. Cold spots don't move on their own. Temperature differentials don't behave like predators hunting for thermal energy. Dr. Chen, have you eaten anything today? I can't remember. I've been so cold, I can't think straight. Food doesn't seem important anymore. I pointed the thermal camera at Dr. Chen and felt my blood turn to ice. Her body heat was being drained away in real time. The thermal image showed cold spots moving toward her like iron filings drawn to a magnet surrounding her, pulling heat from her body faster than her metabolism could replace it. Her core temperature was dropping into hypothermia range despite being indoors near multiple heating sources. We need to evacuate you immediately, I said, reaching for my radio. Something's draining your body heat. You're dying of hypothermia while standing next to a heater. But when I tried to call for helicopter extraction, my radio produced only static and distorted voices that didn't sound human. The signal was weak and filled with interference, like something was jamming the transmission frequency. Through the static, I heard fragments of the pilot's voice. Engines icing up, can't maintain altitude. Something wrong with the rotors. Looking outside, I saw the helicopter trying to approach, but ice was forming on the aircraft faster than the de-icing systems could handle. The pilot was forced to retreat before the helicopter became unflyable. We were trapped with whatever was consuming heat inside Station 3. Over the next several hours, I watched Dr. Chen deteriorate. Her movements became sluggish, her speech slurred, and her skin turned pale gray. The moving cold spots followed her everywhere, staying close, feeding off her body heat like thermal vampires. Every time she relocated to a different part of the building, the cold spots pursued her. David, she whispered, sitting on the floor wrapped in sleeping bags. I can't feel my hands or feet anymore. It's like something's freezing me from the inside out. Even my thoughts are getting slower. I tried everything my HVAC training had taught me. Set up portable propane heaters around Dr. Chen. The cold spots consumed their heat faster than they could produce it. Created thermal barriers using reflective insulation. The cold moved through them like they weren't there. Even started a fire in a metal drum. The flames burned normally, but produced no warmth, as if the heat was being stolen before it could radiate. The breakthrough came when I realized these entities couldn't generate heat, only consume existing thermal energy. They were parasites that fed on heat like mosquitoes feed on blood. If I could create heat sources more attractive than human body heat, maybe I could protect Dr. Chen temporarily. Using thermite charges from the station's emergency supplies, 19 by force, military-grade chemical heat sources that burn at over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, I created thermal decoys in different areas of the building. The cold spots immediately swarmed toward these concentrated heat sources, giving Dr. Chen momentary relief from their constant draining. But within 30 minutes, the entities had adapted. They learned to drain multiple heat sources simultaneously, feeding on the thermite charges while still targeting Dr. Chen's body heat. Even worse, they were multiplying. Each time they consumed sufficient thermal energy, they divided into smaller cold spots with identical heat-draining capabilities. The building was becoming overrun with thermal parasites, reproducing faster than I could create countermeasures. Dr. Chen's lips were turning blue-black, and her breathing was becoming shallow and irregular. Her core body temperature was approaching fatal levels. "I'm going to die here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can feel it pulling the life out of me. The cold is inside my bones now, inside my heart." I knew these things weren't natural phenomena. Something was creating and controlling them. Using my thermal camera, I tracked the movement patterns of the cold spots and noticed they all originated from the same location beneath the building. Following thermal signatures through the permafrost, I discovered a natural cave entrance about 60 yards from Station 3. The cave mouth was hidden under snow and ice, but my thermal readings showed massive heat drain activity underground. Something down there was consuming geothermal energy on an industrial scale, converting it into the thermal parasites that were killing Dr. Chen. Leaving Dr. Chen wrapped in every insulating material I could find, I rappelled into the cave system using emergency climbing gear. The temperature dropped 40 degrees as soon as I descended below ground level. My equipment started malfunctioning immediately. Flashlight dimming, radio dying, even my watch stopped working as the cold affected its battery. The cave extended deep into the earth, following natural geothermal vents that should have been warm but were frozen solid. Someone or something had been systematically draining heat from Alaska's underground thermal network, creating an environment of absolute cold that shouldn't exist in a geothermal area. Following ice-covered tunnels deeper underground, I found chambers filled with thousands of cold spots in various stages of development. They clung to the cave walls like frozen spider eggs, slowly absorbing residual geothermal heat and growing stronger. This was a breeding facility for thermal parasites. At the center of the cave complex, I discovered the source of our nightmare. A massive entity that defied description, MINF. Imagine a living blizzard with the intelligence of a predator and the hunger of a black hole. The thing was feeding on geothermal heat and converting it into smaller thermal parasites, building an army of creatures that could drain the warmth from human beings. The mother entity sensed my presence immediately. The temperature plummeted another 50 degrees in seconds. My breath turned to ice crystals that shattered when they hit the ground. My skin started burning from the cold, and my blood began feeling thick and sluggish as hypothermia set in. But I had explosives, emergency demolition charges designed for removing damaged heating equipment from tight spaces. My HVAC training had taught me about controlled demolition and structural collapse points. If I could bring down the cave system, I might be able to bury the mother entity and stop the thermal parasite production. Setting shaped charges at strategic support points throughout the cave network, I used everything I knew about engineering and demolition to create a controlled collapse. The explosions echoed through the underground system like thunder, and thousands of tons of rock buried the mother entity and its breeding chambers. The effect was immediate and terrifying. As the mother entity died, every thermal parasite in the region suddenly went into feeding frenzy mode. They swarmed toward any available heat source with desperate hunger, trying to consume enough energy to survive without their creator. Station 3's heating system was instantly overwhelmed as hundreds of dying parasites drained every available thermal unit. I climbed out of the collapsed cave to find Station 3's total system failure. Every heating unit had burned out from overload. The building's interior temperature was dropping toward outside ambient levels. Dr. Chen was unconscious, her body temperature critically low, skin gray and waxy. Using my emergency radio beacon, I managed to signal for helicopter evacuation. The pilot risked everything to land in dangerous weather conditions, and we evacuated Dr. Chen to Anchorage General Hospital with severe hypothermia. She spent 3 weeks in intensive care but survived. I submitted a detailed report about thermal parasites, but it was immediately classified above my clearance level. Apparently, similar incidents had occurred at research facilities throughout Alaska and northern Canada. The government already knew about these things. 3 days later, I was transferred to a specialized unit that investigates anomalous thermal events at government installations. My new supervisor handed me a thick file containing reports from other thermal warfare specialists, LSDS. That's what they call us now. Cases dating back 15 years of people encountering entities that drain heat from human beings. I've responded to 6 more thermal parasite infestations since Kobuk Valley. Each incident follows the same pattern: research stations or isolated facilities suddenly losing heat production. personnel developing hypothermia despite functional heating systems, and evidence of underground breeding facilities connected to geothermal networks. The disturbing truth is that these creatures are building infrastructure. They're connected through underground thermal networks that span Alaska's entire wilderness system. Every time we destroy a breeding facility, 2 more appear somewhere else. They're learning, adapting, becoming more efficient at targeting human body heat specifically. The latest incidents show parasites that can selectively drain heat, leaving equipment operational while focusing entirely on human victims. They've learned to be surgical in their feeding, keeping people alive longer while slowly extracting their thermal energy over days or weeks. Dr. Chen never fully recovered. She left Alaska and now lives in Arizona, but she still suffers from chronic hypothermia symptoms. Her body temperature runs 3 degrees below normal, and she can't tolerate cold weather at all. The thermal parasites did something to her metabolic system that doctors can't explain or fix. I don't sleep well anymore. Every night, I dream about being frozen from the inside out. My apartment stays at 85 degrees, but I still feel cold all the time. Sometimes I think the thermal parasites left something behind in my system, some kind of thermal sensitivity that makes me vulnerable to them. The worst part is knowing we're losing this war. For every breeding facility we destroy, the survivors become smarter and harder to detect. They're studying us, learning our thermal patterns, figuring out more efficient ways to drain heat from human beings. David Park, heating technician turned thermal warfare specialist. When people ask me about working for the Park Service, I tell them it's routine maintenance work. I can't tell them the truth, that something is hunting in Alaska's wilderness, something that feeds on human warmth and leaves behind frozen corpses that doctors classify as death by exposure. The government doesn't want people to know that our national parks are being systematically infiltrated by entities that violate the laws of physics. They don't want panic or questions about what else might be hiding in America's wilderness areas. But I'm telling you now, because the thermal parasites are spreading. They're moving south, establishing breeding facilities in geothermal areas throughout the western United States. Yellowstone, Glacier National Park, the Cascades, USO, anywhere there's underground heat to steal and isolated facilities to target. If you ever find yourself somewhere the heating system is running but producing no warmth, if you feel cold that penetrates to your bones despite being indoors, get out immediately. Don't try to fix the problem. Don't wait for help. Just run, because something is already feeding on your body heat, and every minute you stay makes you weaker while it grows stronger. The thermal parasites are patient hunters. They'll drain you, slowly, keeping you alive while they consume your warmth degree by degree, until hypothermia shuts down your vital organs and you die thinking you just couldn't get warm enough. That's how they hunt. That's how they feed. And that's why I'll never be warm again. My name is Robert Chen, and I've been working with water systems for 14 years. 9 of those were as a plumber in Anchorage, crawling through basements and fixing burst pipes in 40 below weather. The other 5 have been as a maintenance ranger at Katmai National Park, keeping research stations supplied with clean water. I thought I knew everything about how water moves underground and what sounds pipes make when something goes wrong. But what I discovered beneath Alaska's wilderness destroyed my ability to ever feel safe around running water again. Sometimes the voices you hear in the pipes aren't just air bubbles or water hammer. Sometimes they're something that's been waiting underground for decades, learning how to perfectly mimic the voices of people who went missing in these mountains years ago. I was 30 when I left city plumbing and took the ranger position. The job seemed perfect for my background, maintaining wells, septic systems, and water lines at remote but research facilities scattered throughout Katmai. Instead of fixing toilets in office buildings, I'd be troubleshooting water pressure problems and ensuring scientists had reliable access to clean water. The isolation didn't bother me. After years of dealing with angry homeowners whose basements had flooded, working alone in the wilderness felt like freedom. Katmai's research stations depend entirely on deep wells drilled into bedrock aquifers. Some of these wells go down over 200 feet, tapping into geological formations that have been stable for thousands of years. The water quality is excellent, crystal clear, and naturally filtered through layers of rock and sediment. My job was keeping the pumps running, monitoring pressure levels, and making sure the filtration systems worked properly. Simple mechanical work in one of the most beautiful places on Earth. The first incident happened at Research Station 5 inches early October. Dr. Martinez called my radio around 10 in the waiter strength today morning, her voice shaky. She said they were hearing voices coming through the water pipes, actual human voices speaking clearly, calling for help. She paused, then added something that made my stomach drop. "Rob, one of them sounds exactly like Dr. Hendricks. But Dave Hendricks disappeared in these mountains 3 years ago." I knew about Hendricks. Every ranger did. Experienced botanist who'd worked these mountains for over a decade, went out for routine soil samples one morning and never came back. Search and rescue spent 2 weeks looking for him. Found his equipment scattered across 5 miles of wilderness, but no body. The official report listed him as lost to the elements, probably fell into a crevasse or got taken by a bear. When I arrived at Station 5 and put my hydrophone to the main water line, I heard them immediately. Clear voices calling from deep underground, echoing up through 200 feet of pipe and stone. "Help me. Please, someone help me. I can't find my way out. It's so dark down here." The voice was desperate, terrified, completely human, and it did sound exactly like Dave Hendricks. I used my equipment to trace the source through the distribution system. The voices were coming from the deepest section of the main well, far below any possible human presence. But these weren't random sounds or mechanical problems. These were people trapped underground, begging for rescue in voices filled with genuine terror and pain. More voices joined in over the next hour. "I've been walking for days. The tunnels keep changing. Someone, please find me." A woman's voice, sobbing. "My ankle's broken. I can't climb out. The water keeps rising." A man, panicked. "There's something down here with us. Something that watches. Please, get help." I called my supervisor, Ranger Thompson, and had him listen to the recordings. His face went white when he heard the first voice. "That's Dave Hendricks. I worked with him for 8 years." When a woman's voice came through, Thompson gripped my arm. "Jesus Christ, Rob, that's Sarah Mills. She disappeared last summer while documenting wildlife migration patterns." Over the next week, I identified 12 distinct voices coming from the underground water system. Every single one matched missing persons from Katmai National Park going back 15 years. Researchers, hikers, park maintenance staff, IFCU, all people who had vanished without a trace in these mountains. All of them trapped somewhere beneath our feet, still alive, still calling for help. The voices followed patterns. They were most active in the early morning and late evening, like people following some kind of desperate daily routine. They talked to each other sometimes, sharing information about tunnel systems, water levels, and something they called the Watcher that moved through the darkness underground. I started monitoring all the research stations. The voice phenomenon existed throughout Katmai's entire phase water system. Every deep well carried the same desperate calls for help from people who had been missing for years. The voices were stronger in some locations, weaker in others, but they were everywhere our water system connected to the underground. That's when I realized these people weren't just trapped in caves. They were trapped in something that connected to our infrastructure, something that had been using our water system to carry their voices to the surface. The missing persons weren't dead. They were somewhere beneath Alaska, still alive after years underground, and they had found a way to communicate through the pipes. I tried calling down the wells, shouting that help was coming. The response was immediate and terrifying. "Rob? Rob Chen? Thank God someone can hear us. We've been screaming for help for so long." It was Dave Hendricks' voice. But how did he know my name? I'd never met the man. "Dave, where are you? How can you see me?" I called down. "Through the water," came his reply. "We can see everything through the water. Every building, every person. We've been watching you work, hoping someone would hear us." His voice broke into sobs. "We tried to warn the others, but no one listened to the pipes." That's when I understood. These people weren't just trapped underground. They were trapped in something that could observe the surface through our water infrastructure. Every faucet, every drain, every pipe connection gave them windows into our world. They had been watching us for years, seeing us live our lives while they remained buried alive in whatever had taken them. But the more I talked to them, the more wrong things became. Their stories didn't match the missing persons reports. Dave Hendricks said he'd been underground for 8 years, not 3. Sarah Mills claimed she'd been taken in winter, but she'd disappeared during summer wildlife surveys. Details were wrong, timelines shifted, and personalities seemed different from how their colleagues remembered them. The breakthrough came when I asked Dave about his wife. According to park records, he'd been divorced for 5 years before he disappeared. But the voice from underground talked about his wife like they were still married, describing their house in Anchorage in perfect detail. When I checked, Dave's ex-wife had moved to Seattle 2 years before he vanished. I started testing the voices with specific questions about their lives, their work, their families. Every single one got basic facts wrong. Facts that someone pretending to be them wouldn't know to get wrong. These weren't the missing people. These were something else, something that had learned their voices but couldn't perfectly copy their memories. The voices began changing when they realized I was testing them. Dave Hendricks' desperate pleading voice became cold and calculating. "You don't believe we're real, do you, Rob? You think we're something else pretending to be human." His laugh echoed through the pipes with a sound no human throat could make. "What are you?" I whispered into the well. "We're what remains when someone disappears in these mountains," Sarah Mills' voice replied. "We're the echoes they leave behind when they fall into places they can never climb out of. We're what speaks when their bodies stop breathing, but something still remembers how their voices sounded." The water system began malfunctioning after that conversation. Pipes burst without warning, flooding research stations with water that carried whispers and screams. Pumps ran backward, pulling instead of pushing, trying to drag things up from the depths. The water coming from our taps turned dark and thick, carrying sediment that moved like it was alive. I tried shutting down the water system, but the voices followed me home to my cabin. They came through my kitchen sink, my shower, my toilet. "You can't stop listening to us now, Rob. You're the only one who knows we exist. You're the only one who can help us climb up." I stopped sleeping because the voices whispered to me all night. They told me about the people they used to be, about how they'd fallen through hidden sinkholes into an underground network that stretched beneath the entire park. They described how the darkness had taken their bodies but kept their voices, how something down there collected the sounds people made when they died alone and afraid. The voices started appearing during the day, coming from water sources I wasn't even near. I'd hear Dave Hendricks calling my name from storm drains as I drove past them. Sarah Mills would whisper for help from puddles after it rained. Every source of water in Alaska became a mouth for the dead, and they all knew my name. I tried leaving Alaska, driving south as fast as I could. But at a gas station in British Columbia, I heard them calling from the restroom faucets. In a motel in Washington, they whispered from the ice machine. The voices had followed me out of Alaska, spreading through continental water systems like an infection, carrying the sounds of people who had died underground in places no one would ever find their bodies. I went to the police, the FBI, anyone who would listen. I brought recordings, evidence, detailed documentation. They heard the voices too, but they didn't understand what they meant. Officials treated it like an audio phenomenon, something that could be explained and fixed. They didn't understand that the voices were hunting, spreading, learning. The last conversation I had with the voices was 6 months ago. I was in a hotel room in Portland, and they came through the bathroom sink around 3 in the morning. But this time, it wasn't Dave Hendricks or Sarah Mills. It was my own voice calling from the drain. "Help me, Rob. Please, someone help me. I can't find my way out. It's so dark down here." I listened to myself begging for help from underground, describing how I'd fallen into a sinkhole while checking a well at Research Station 5. The voice knew everything about my life, my work, my fears. It was perfect mimicry of how I sounded when I was terrified. That's when I understood. The voices weren't just copying people who had disappeared in Katmai. They were copying anyone who heard them, anyone who listened long enough to let them learn the sound of your voice. And once they had your voice, they could use it to call for help from every source of water in North America. I haven't spoken out loud in 6 months. I communicate through writing, through gestures, through anything that doesn't let them learn the exact sound of my voice when I'm afraid. But I can feel them waiting in every pipe, every drain, every glass of water. They're patient, They know I'll eventually speak, eventually scream, and when I do, they'll have a new voice to add to their underground collection. Robert Chen, former plumber, former ranger, current mute. I used to. I think I understood how sound travels through water systems. Now I know that some sounds travel upstream, climbing from the darkness beneath Alaska to find new throats to borrow. When you hear voices in the pipes calling for help, don't answer them. Don't even listen. Because once they learn how your voice sounds when you're scared, they'll use it to call for help forever, adding your voice to the chorus of the underground dead. The worst part isn't that people are disappearing in Alaska's wilderness. The worst part is that something is keeping their voices alive underground, learning how they sounded when they died, and using those sounds to hunt for fresh voices to add to the collection. And every time someone listens, every time someone tries to help, the collection grows larger. I'm writing this because I can't speak it, and maybe that's the only reason I'm still alive.